The muddy river and the mysterious man the sun was already starting to dip behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. It had rained the night before, and the swollen river carved its way violently through the valley, its banks muddy and unstable. In the small town of Miller's Ridge, the world still moved slowly. People walked instead of ran, spoke softly instead of shouting, and trusted each other without needing reasons. But that day, something unusual stirred in the stillness, something that would ripple far beyond the edge of town. 12-year-old Emma Lewis had always loved coming down to the river after school. While most kids her age were glued to their phones, Emma liked to collect smooth stones and listen to the sounds of rushing water. It was her secret place, her quiet world, where the burdens of life, her mom's second job, her dad's long silence since leaving them, and the loneliness that came with growing up too fast, could be forgotten for a little while. But that evening, the river didn't sound peaceful. It roared like it was angry, and the usually calm water was high and fast. As she reached her favorite spot by the bridge, Emma noticed something out of place. At first, it was just a glint of silver, a reflection that caught her eye. Then she saw it clearly. A pickup truck had skidded off the road and was half submerged in the rushing water below. The current slammed against it with brutal force, pushing it deeper into the river's belly. Emma's heart slammed in her chest. There was someone inside. The driver's side door was jammed, and she could barely make out a figure slumped against the steering wheel. The man wasn't moving. Without thinking, without hesitation, Emma threw her backpack to the ground and ran down the steep embankment. Her boots slipped in the mud, her hands scraped against rocks, but she kept going. Something in her small frame burned with urgency. She didn't know who the man was, she didn't care. All she knew was that he needed help, and no one else was there to give it. She splashed into the river, the freezing water biting into her legs and rising quickly to her waist. Her breath caught from the shock, but she pushed forward, one step at a time, until she reached the passenger side of the truck. She pounded on the window with her fist, but the man didn't respond. Panic surged through her. Using all her strength, she tried the handle. It didn't budge. Emma looked around, eyes darting until they found a large tree branch washed up on the bank. She scrambled back through the water, grabbed it, and returned. She jammed the end of it between the doorframe and the window, using it like a lever. She screamed from the strain, her muscles shaking, but finally, the glass cracked. She smashed, her elbow through the rest and reached in. Blood oozed from her arm, but she didn't stop. The man inside was heavy, unconscious, and his seatbelt was stuck. She reached into her pocket for the little pair of scissors she kept for art class. Her fingers trembled as she cut through the strap, then pulled him as the car groaned and shifted deeper into the water. The current pulled hard, trying to claim them both. Emma slipped once, going under for a moment that felt like forever, but her hands never let go of the man's collar. Coughing and soaked, she dragged him to the shore inch by inch. By the time she collapsed beside him, gasping for air, the last rays of the sun were disappearing. She placed her ear against his chest and waited. A beat. Another. Then a weak cough. He was alive. Emma rolled onto her back and stared at the sky, the cold pressing into her bones. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just lay there in the mud beside a stranger she had pulled from death, wondering what kind of world she had just stepped into. Minutes later, headlights appeared at the top of the road. Someone must have called emergency services. Paramedics came rushing down, shouting questions and wrapping blankets. They took the man away quickly, and one kind nurse stayed behind, checking Emma's pulse and gently touching her bloodied arm. "You saved him," the woman said softly. "You saved his life." Emma didn't reply. Her teeth chattered and her eyes stared out at the water. Something inside her had changed. 2 days later, Emma sat in the small waiting room of Miller's Ridge Hospital. The sheriff had come by her house that morning, asking if she'd be willing to visit the man she rescued. He didn't say much, just that the man had asked for her by name. Emma was confused. She hadn't told anyone her name that night. Not even the paramedics. Now, she waited quietly, clutching the arms of the chair. She hadn't told anyone, not her mom, not her teacher, not her best friend, that she had been having dreams ever since that night. Strange dreams. In them, the man was standing in the middle of the river, but he wasn't drowning. He was glowing like a star had fallen into the water. In the dream, he looked right at her and smiled, but every time she tried to speak, she woke up. The nurse finally called her name and led her down the hallway. Emma's small feet echoed on the tile floor as they approached the room. The nurse opened the door, gave her a nod, and stepped aside. Emma walked in slowly. The man was sitting up in bed looking out the window. He turned when he heard her, and for a moment neither of them said a word. Then slowly he smiled. Emma's breath caught in her throat, because the man in the bed, scruffy, bruised, and stitched, was someone she had seen before. Not in real life, but on movie posters, on TV, on the internet. The man she had dragged from a sinking truck was Keanu Reeves, and he knew her name. What is Keanu Reeves doing in this small, forgotten town? And how does he know her name? The secret visitor and the story beneath the surface. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her small figure framed by the sterile hospital light behind her. She had expected the man she saved to be someone ordinary, maybe a trucker passing through town, or a lost traveler. But not this. Not Keanu Reeves. Not the man who had lived in her imagination during quiet movie nights with her mom, his gentle eyes and kind smile etched in her memory from old films that made her believe in heroes. The thought that she had dragged him from a sinking car, that she had held his weight through the fury of the river in the cold, was almost too much to process, and now he was here, alive, looking at her with an expression that was more than gratitude. It was recognition. He motioned gently to the chair beside the bed, his voice soft, slightly raspy from whatever trauma he had endured. "Emma, right?" he asked, and her heart skipped again. He knew her name, not just because someone told him. It was in the way he said it, like he had known her for years, like it mattered. She nodded slowly, still unsure whether to sit or speak or just stare. Finally, her feet obeyed, and she crossed the room with slow steps, slipping into the chair. The hospital room was quiet except for the faint beeping of a heart monitor and the murmur of wind brushing against the glass outside. The storm had passed, but the weight it left behind lingered. How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers twisted in her lap, stained faintly pink where the bandages wrapped her wounds from that night. Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. Then he looked down at his hands, rough and bruised, and smiled to himself as if remembering something far away. "I heard it," he said finally, "somewhere between the river and the dark. I wasn't fully conscious, but your voice reached me. You kept saying, 'Stay with me, stay with me.' And then you said your name. I don't know how, but I heard it." Emma blinked. She hadn't realized she'd spoken at all during the rescue, let alone repeated her name. The memory was hazy, like a half-remembered dream, but deep down she knew it was true. "You almost died," she said, her voice firmer now. "The river was pulling you under. If I hadn't gotten there in time." "But you did," he interrupted gently. "You did get there. And you saved me." Emma stared at him, a mixture of pride and confusion in her eyes. This wasn't how heroes were supposed to act. They were supposed to save others, not be saved. And they certainly weren't supposed to show up in quiet towns like Miller's Ridge, bleeding and alone. "Why were you even out here?" she asked. "No one famous ever comes to this town. There's not even a movie theater anymore." Keanu chuckled softly, the sound low and genuine. "I wasn't here for anything big," he said. "I just wanted to disappear for a while. I was driving, through places no one knew, looking for silence, maybe some peace. And then something happened. I was following my GPS, not realizing the roads were still slick from the rain. I missed the turn, the wheels lost traction, and the next thing I knew, I was in the river." "So you weren't here for a movie or anything?" He shook his head. "No cameras, no press, no scripts, just space." Emma leaned back, trying to digest everything. The man she saved hadn't just fallen into the river. He had fallen into her world. And now he was sitting here, peeling back his life like pages in a storybook. And even though he didn't say much, she could feel there was more underneath the surface. Pain. Maybe loneliness. The kind that echoed her own. "You looked sad even when you were unconscious," she said suddenly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. He looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Emma hesitated, then explained. "You were quiet, but your face, I don't know. It looked like someone who was trying not to cry, even when you were asleep, like you were holding something in." Keanu's expression shifted. The smile faded into something more somber. He looked away toward the window, watching a leaf drift past outside. "I've been carrying a lot," he admitted. "Loss, regret. Sometimes it gets heavy, even if you're used to pretending it doesn't." Emma understood that more than she wanted to. She had learned how to be the strong one in her house. After her dad left, it was just her and her mom. Her mom worked 2 jobs, barely had time to sit down, and Emma pretended it was okay. She stopped asking for help with homework. She started waking up earlier to make her own breakfast. She told herself she didn't miss her dad's laugh or the way he used to fix her broken toys with tape and silly voices. "Me too," she said quietly. "I mean, not the same as you, but yeah." For a moment, there was no age difference between them, just 2 people who had both survived something, who both knew what it meant to feel alone in a crowded world. Then Keanu reached to the side table and picked up a small notebook. It was worn at the edges, pages sticking out slightly. He held it out to her. "I started writing something after I woke up," he said. "I don't know why. Maybe because I knew I'd see you again. I want you to have it." Emma took the notebook carefully, her fingers trembling. She opened the first page where he had written in small, neat handwriting, "To the girl who saved me when I had forgotten how to save myself." Her eyes filled with tears. Just then the door opened and a nurse stepped inside, her face pale. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got something urgent," she said. "There's a man downstairs asking to see you both. Says he's a detective. Says something strange is going on." Keanu and Emma exchanged glances. "What kind of strange?" he asked. He didn't say, just that he has information about what really happened the night you crashed. And it's not what anyone thought. Emma's hands tightened around the notebook. The river had brought them together. But it hadn't just been an accident. And the truth was about to surface. Who is the mysterious detective, and what secret is he hiding about the crash? The detective's warning, and the shadow behind the storm. The hallway outside the hospital room seemed colder as Emma and Keanu followed. The nurse, their footsteps echoing faintly on the polished floor. Fluorescent lights hummed above them, and the sterile smell of antiseptic clung to the air like something unfinished. Neither of them spoke. Not yet. There was something about the way the nurse had delivered the message. Something in her pale expression and the way her hands trembled slightly. That made silence feel safer than questions. At the far end of the hall, near the elevator, stood a man in a long brown coat. His hair was streaked with gray, slicked back but slightly unruly, and his eyes were sharp, scanning everything like he was piecing together an invisible puzzle. He stood still, but there was tension in his frame, the kind that suggested he was used to moving fast, maybe too fast. When he saw them, he gave a small nod and stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," he said first, offering a firm handshake that Keanu returned slowly. "I'm Detective Harlan West, and you must be Emma." He turned to the girl, his tone gentler, but still brisk. "You're the one who pulled him out of the river." Emma gave a tiny nod, her eyes scanning the man's coat for a badge, but there wasn't one visible. His expression softened for a moment when he looked at her, as if acknowledging something far bigger than her age. "You've got courage," he said, "but I'm afraid things are more complicated than they appear." They moved to a private consultation room, and Harlan closed the door behind them. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed lowly, and for a moment, the detective just stood there tapping the folder in his hand before laying it flat on the table. He didn't sit. His stance was deliberate, like he needed to deliver something without settling. When you crashed into that river, he began, looking at Keanu. The initial report said it was an accident. The road was slick and the tire marks suggested loss of control. But the damage pattern on the truck, it doesn't match a normal skid. It looks like your vehicle was forced off the road. Keanu blinked slowly, the words washing over him. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, hands clasped. You're saying someone tried to run me off? Harlan nodded grimly. And not just that. Your brakes were tampered with. I confirmed it myself. Someone wanted you in that river. Someone expected you not to come back out. Emma's breath hitched, and she stared at Keanu. The image of him unconscious in the water, the way the truck had groaned and sunk. She had thought it was just a terrible accident. But now the memory took on a darker shape. The silence of the road, the eerie emptiness of the area, and the way the truck had been angled. Now it all felt intentional. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but his jaw clenched slightly. Do you know who? He asked. Harlan hesitated. I have a lead. There's a name, but no proof yet. And until I get it, you're both in danger. Whoever did this might already know you survived. And they won't like that. Emma's voice finally cracked through the tension. But why? Why would someone want to hurt him? She looked at Keanu, confusion and fear mixing behind her eyes. You're an actor. You don't hurt people. Keanu's gaze lowered to the table for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice softer this time. Not everything about me is on the screen, he said. Before I ever made movies, before the red carpets and cameras, I lived a different life, one that's not in the tabloids. Emma frowned, her small hands curling around the edge of the table. What do you mean? Keanu sighed, and something about the weight in his eyes made her lean in closer, listening, more carefully than ever. 25 years ago, before everything changed, I was involved in something I've never talked about publicly. I was young, broke, and reckless. I had friends who made bad choices, dangerous ones. One night we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone got hurt. I didn't pull the trigger, but I was there. And I stayed silent. I kept the secret. Harlan cut in, his voice tense. He testified against them later, helped put a very powerful man behind bars. But that man had friends. People with long memories. People who don't like loose ends. Emma looked from Keanu to the detective, then back again. The story felt too big for the room, too heavy for a girl her age, but she wasn't scared of it. She had seen fear up close. It was in the eyes of her mother when the bills came in the way kids avoided her at school because she didn't wear brand clothes. But this wasn't that kind of fear. This was a fear rooted in justice. The kind that came when you tried to do the right thing and the past refused to let go. So someone tried to kill you because you did the right thing? She asked, her voice trembling. That's usually when they try the hardest, Harlan replied. And the fact that Emma saved you changed the outcome. Now they know they missed. Now they might come back to finish what they started. Keanu looked over at Emma, something fierce and protective rising in his eyes. She's just a kid, he said firmly. They don't get to drag her into this. They already have, Harlan said. The minute she pulled you out, the minute she showed up on the hospital report, she became part of the story. Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice calm and steady. So what do we do now? The detective stared at her for a long second, as if surprised by the steel in her words. Then he opened the folder on the table and slid a photograph toward them. It showed a man in a suit stepping out of a black vehicle. The photo was grainy, but the expression on his face was sharp, calculating. His name is Leon Radner, Harlan said. He's the brother of the man Keanu helped lock up decades ago. He's smart, wealthy, and plays clean on the surface. But beneath that, he's got ties to some very dark networks. Keanu studied the picture for a long moment, then looked up. What's he doing now? Traveling under aliases. Moving through small towns. Your crash happened right after he passed through Miller's Ridge. And yesterday, someone matching his description was spotted outside your hospital wing. Emma's chest tightened. The thought that someone had been watching them, someone waiting, for the perfect moment. It felt like the beginning of a nightmare that refused to end. "We need to leave," Keanu said suddenly, his voice firm. "She's not safe here." "Not just yet," Harlan replied. "I need more time. You move too soon. You might lead them straight to your next hiding place. I'll arrange protection for tonight. But tomorrow, we'll move both of you somewhere they can't reach." Keanu looked like he wanted to argue, but then he glanced at Emma and nodded. "Fine, but if anything happens, anything at all, I'm not waiting." The detective nodded once, closed the folder, and stepped out of the room. Silence fell again, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that lingers after a storm, waiting to see if the winds will rise again. Emma looked down at the notebook in her hands. She flipped to the second page where Keanu had written a quote. "Bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a small girl pulling a stranger from the river." And outside the window, the shadows stretched longer across the hills. Can Keanu and Emma escape the trap before Leon Radner closes in? And what deeper secret is Keanu still hiding? The cabin in the hills and the unspoken truth. The next morning broke with a quiet that felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. The sky above Miller's Ridge was cloudless, pale blue and empty, but there was something cold in the air, something that crawled under the skin even with the sun shining bright. By the time Emma and Keanu were led to the back of the unmarked vehicle parked behind the hospital, it already felt like they were leaving behind more than just a building. It felt like they were leaving behind whatever innocence had remained. In their old lives, Detective Harlan had spent the night securing an off-grid location deep in the hills that surrounded the town. It was an old forest ranger's cabin, barely known, long retired from official use, reachable only through a twisted trail no GPS could map. He said it was safe, said no one would find them there, said it would buy time. But as the truck climbed, the steep dirt road and trees closed in from both sides like silent guardians. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into a new chapter of something much bigger than anyone had prepared them for. Keanu sat beside her in the back seat, silent for most of the drive. He had changed out of the hospital gown, and now wore a worn leather jacket someone from the sheriff's office had left for him. Its sleeves rolled just slightly above his healing wounds. His face was tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of memories pressing down behind his eyes. Even the air between them felt different now. Charged, fragile, and waiting. "Do you think this place is really safe?" Emma asked finally, her voice low, her fingers tracing a line in the foggy window. "Safe enough for now," Keanu replied, then turned his head toward her. "But safety isn't just about where you are. It's about who you're with." She looked at him then, and for the first time, she didn't see the movie star she'd once watched on screen. She saw the man who had carried secrets for decades, who had survived being hunted, who had been pulled from a river by a 12-year-old girl, and who now sat beside her, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood what it meant to feel like a ghost inside your own life. They arrived at the cabin just past noon. It was smaller than Emma expected, half covered in moss, with faded wood and crooked windows. Inside it smelled of old pine and dust, but the fireplace had been lit recently and a kettle hissed gently on the iron stove. Harlan had already been there, leaving behind a radio, emergency supplies, and a handwritten map with escape routes marked in red. Keanu scanned the cabin slowly, checking each room before locking the front and back doors. Once he was satisfied, he leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, and looked at Emma with a seriousness that made her sit straighter on the couch. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, "and I think it's time." Emma's heart thudded once. She didn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. Keanu walked over, pulled a wooden chair beside her, and sat down. The firelight flickered across his features, casting soft shadows that made his expression look even more worn. "Remember when I told you I was involved in something a long time ago?" he began. Emma nodded again. "I wasn't just there, I was part of it. Not because I wanted to be, but because I didn't know how to walk away. I was young, angry, lost. The people I was with, they promised me family, purpose, a way out of the pain I was carrying. And for a while I believed them. But they were using me, and one night they crossed a line. A man was hurt badly. I knew it was wrong. I knew someone had to speak up. So I did. I went to the police, testified, and because of that, one of the most dangerous people I ever knew ended up behind bars. He paused, his voice thick. But I never stopped running from the guilt. Even though I did the right thing, part of me always felt like I had blood on my hands. And no matter how many movies I made, no matter how many smiles I wore on red carpets, and that part never left. Emma stared at him, her mind racing. The story he had just told her sounded like something from a film, except there was no script, no audience, no safety net. It was raw, it was real, and in a strange way it made her trust him more than ever. "You didn't hurt that man," she said quietly. "You saved others by speaking up. And maybe you were meant to be in that river. Not to die, but to meet me. Maybe this was supposed to happen." Keanu gave a soft, broken laugh. "You sound a lot older than 12. People say that when they don't want to listen to kids," she said with a small shrug. "But I've had to grow up. Fast." Outside, a branch cracked. Both of them froze. Keanu rose slowly from the chair and moved to the window, careful not to step on the creaky floorboard near the fireplace. Emma watched as he shifted the curtain just enough to see outside. For a moment, nothing moved. Then he turned back to her. "Probably just a deer," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Emma nodded slowly, but her stomach was tight now. She felt it again. That same eerie pressure she'd felt at the hospital. Like they were being watched. That evening they ate quietly. Canned soup and old crackers, shared in the dim light of a lantern. Afterward, Keanu lit a second fire in the small stove of the bedroom while Emma spread out the sleeping bags the detective had left. The cabin creaked with every gust of wind outside, and the shadows stretched long and restless across the walls. As the night deepened, Keanu sat by, the fire staring into the flames. Emma was curled in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, the notebook he gave her open on her lap. She had read the first 3 pages over and over again. Each one held something different, a quote, a memory, a confession. The words were soft, thoughtful, and filled with pain, but on the 4th page, there was something new, a warning. "If you're reading this, and I'm not beside you, don't run to the door. Run to the woods. There's a path behind the cabin that leads to the old ranger station. Don't wait, don't scream, just move." Her breath caught. She looked up quickly. Keanu was still there, eyes closed now, half asleep by the fire. But her instincts screamed louder than her logic, because from the other side of the room, just beyond the curtain behind the kitchen, she heard a floorboard creak. And this time, it wasn't the wind. Who is inside the cabin? And will Emma be able to escape the trap with Keanu before it's too late? Into the woods, into the truth. The room seemed to shrink in that instant, every corner suddenly alive with tension. The fire crackled softly behind Keanu, its light casting long, flickering shadows against the old wooden walls. But it wasn't the fire that held Emma's attention. It was the silence that followed that single creak, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full of breath being held, full of footsteps waiting to follow, full of eyes watching. From the dark, Emma didn't move, not at first. She knew what fear felt like. It was the cold grip that came when her mother didn't come home on time. It was the sound of slammed doors when her father used to leave the house in anger. But this was different. This was primal, survival, deep. And in that moment, she didn't feel like a 12-year-old girl anymore. She felt like someone on the edge of a choice, run or freeze. Her eyes darted to Keanu, whose head was still leaned back against the chair, eyes closed but breathing steady. She wanted to call his name, but the memory of the warning in the notebook burned hotter than the fire. Don't scream. Don't wait. Just move. Slowly, silently, she slid the notebook closed and slipped it into the pocket of her hoodie. Her body moved on instinct now. She rose from the floor, careful to avoid the spots she'd seen creak earlier, and tiptoed toward Keanu. She knelt beside him, placed her small hand on his and gently squeezed. His eyes opened instantly. There was no confusion, no drowsiness, only clarity and understanding. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said everything. They were not alone. Keanu's body tensed beneath the blanket draped over him, but his expression remained calm. He leaned toward her, whispered so softly it was almost inaudible. "The back door. You lead. I'll follow. Stay low." Emma nodded, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. She moved first, slipping through the narrow hall that led to the back of the cabin. The old Ranger door had a rusted latch, and she knew from earlier it creaked if opened too fast. She reached it, steadied her hand, and slowly lifted the latch. It groaned faintly and she winced, but she kept moving. Kept going until the door opened just wide enough to let her through. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap. It smelled of pine and damp leaves. She stepped out onto the porch and crouched low, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. Keanu followed seconds later, his jacket already zipped, one hand holding a flashlight wrapped in cloth to dull its light. He didn't say a word. He only nodded toward the tree line. They ran not wildly, not loudly. They ran like shadows, soft-footed and silent, through tall grass and fallen needles, weaving between twisted trunks and thick bushes. Behind them, the cabin remained still. No lights turned on. No doors opened. Whoever had creaked that floorboard hadn't revealed themselves, but that made it worse. Emma's legs burned, but she didn't slow. Keanu stayed behind her, his larger steps clearing low branches and guiding her where the path split. They didn't stop until the cabin was completely out of sight, swallowed by trees and distance. After what felt like forever, they reached a clearing where the moon broke through the canopy above. There, hidden behind a wall of thick ivy and moss, stood the old ranger station, smaller than the first cabin, half rotten, but still standing. Keanu pushed open the door with a grunt and ushered her inside. It was dark, musty, and smelled of damp wood, but it was shelter. He shut the door behind them and wedged a broken chair against the knob. Then he turned to Emma, crouched before her and placed his hands on her shoulders. "You did good," he said, his voice low but firm. "You saw the danger. You listened. You acted. That saved us." Emma nodded, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't want to leave you behind." "But you didn't," he said. "You stayed brave. That's more than most grown-ups would do." She didn't reply. Instead, she looked around the tiny shelter. The walls were covered in old ranger maps, faded and curling. In the corner, a rusted desk stood against a cracked window, and above it an old radio, ancient, dust-covered, but maybe still functional. Keanu moved toward it, wiping dust off the dials. "Let's see if we can get a signal," he said. He fiddled with the knobs, turning one slowly until static burst from the speaker, followed by silence, then faint voices. "Search radius confirmed. Target location last pinged within zone 6. Prepare extraction." Emma's eyes widened. Keanu turned the dial down and looked at her. "They're not just looking. They're tracking. That means someone nearby knows more than we thought." "But who?" Emma asked, her voice tight, with worry. "Who would help them?" Keanu leaned against the desk, thinking. "Leon Radner has connections. People who owe him favors. People who are paid to stay quiet. Maybe someone in town. Maybe someone at the hospital. But we can't guess now. We need to stay ahead." Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the notebook again. She flipped through the pages looking for something, anything that might help. Near the back, she found a page Keanu hadn't mentioned. It wasn't a memory or a quote. It was a map, hand-drawn, marked with initials and lines leading to a spot labeled the Echo Tree. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up. Keanu took the notebook, his brow furrowing. "I drew this years ago," he said. "Back when I used to visit this place before the world knew who I was. The Echo Tree is real. It's an old oak halfway up Copper Ridge, hollow at the base with a hidden latch inside. I used it as a place to store things I couldn't keep with me. If there's anything left there, it might help us." Emma stared at him. "We should go." He nodded slowly. "First light. It's too dangerous in the dark." They stayed in the ranger station that night, taking turns resting. Keanu kept watch at the window while Emma dozed beneath his jacket, her head on a pile of rope and canvas. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the branches like a warning. And miles away, at the abandoned cabin now surrounded by men in black coats, a voice spoke into a radio. "They're gone." The reply crackled back through the speaker. "No, they're not gone. They're moving. And next time, we finish what we started." What secrets lie hidden beneath the echo tree? And will Keanu and Emma reach it before the enemies close in for the final strike? Beneath the echo tree, beyond the silence, morning came with a sky the color of smoke, low clouds crawling over the hills like tired beasts, dragging shadows behind them. The forest was still damp from the night, and everything, from the moss underfoot to the bark peeling off the trees, seemed quieter, heavier, like nature itself knew something was coming. Keanu and Emma stood just outside the ranger station, their eyes scanning the horizon where the trail to Copper Ridge began. The map in the notebook had been studied, memorized, folded, and slipped into Emma's coat pocket like a talisman. The echo tree waited somewhere beyond the rise, beyond the tangled brush and fog. But what waited with it? That was the part they couldn't predict. Keanu adjusted the straps of the canvas satchel slung across his back. Inside were the only things they dared carry: water, a flashlight, the map, a folding knife, and the same pair of scissors Emma had used to cut him free that night in the river. She had insisted on bringing them, not for protection, but for remembrance, for proof that even the smallest things could change the course of a life. They moved quietly through the woods, taking narrow deer paths where the branches were too tight for cars, their boots sinking into soft earth and cracked pine cones. Keanu led most of the way, but every now and then, he'd glance back at Emma, checking not just that she was close, but that she was okay. She never asked for help, never slowed down. Even when the climb got steep and the air thin, she kept going, her face set in that same expression she'd worn at the hospital, the one that said she knew what it meant to be strong, even when everything inside her wanted to break. The echo tree wasn't named for sound, not exactly. It stood alone, near the edge of a rocky cliff that overlooked the entire valley. When the wind passed through its hollow trunk, it made a deep, humming tone, like a voice too old to speak words. Keanu had found it years ago during a hike back when he used to escape to Miller's Ridge without telling anyone. Back then, he had buried secrets beneath its roots the way some men bury pain, quietly and without ceremony. When they finally reached it, Emma was the first to spot the latch. "It's here," she said, brushing away years of moss with her fingers. Keanu stepped beside her, knelt down and lifted the hidden panel at the base of the tree. A small wooden compartment lay beneath, lined with weatherproof fabric. Inside were a few carefully wrapped items: an envelope sealed in wax, an old Polaroid of two young men laughing with their arms slung around each other's shoulders, a silver key, and a flash drive in a rusted tin. He sat back slowly, holding the contents like they were made of glass. "This picture?" he whispered, handing it to Emma. "This is me. And the other guy, that's Samuel Radner, Leon's brother, the one who's in prison." Emma stared at the photo. The two of them looked nothing like criminals, just boys, lost maybe, trying too hard to look like they weren't afraid. It made her feel sick and sad all at once, because sometimes you didn't know who someone really was until it was too late. Keanu opened the envelope next. Inside were handwritten pages, some yellowed with time. Names, dates, locations. It was a ledger, a record of everything the Radners had done. Money laundering, blackmail, people disappeared without answers. And next to some of the names were red circles marked years ago. One of them was Harlan West. "No," Keanu muttered, his hand tightening around the page. Emma leaned in. "What is it?" "Harlan. The detective. He wasn't just an informant. He was their informant, planted, inside the investigation from the beginning. He's been watching me all this time, and he sent us into the woods because he knew they were coming. The realization hit hard. The floor dropped beneath their feet without them moving an inch. Suddenly, the protection, the safe house, the map, it all made sense. Harlan had been playing both sides, feeding them just enough truth to earn their trust, then waiting until the trap was ready to snap shut. Keanu stood up quickly, scanning the ridge below. From where they were, they could see the valley stretch out like a green quilt. And sure enough, far down the winding road, 3 black vehicles were moving through the trees, slow and careful. "We've got minutes," he said, grabbing the flash drive and slipping it into his pocket. "Maybe less." Emma stared down at the paper still clutched in his hand. "But now we have proof, right?" "We do," Keanu said, nodding. "But that only matters if we survive long enough to give it to someone who can use it." They ran, cutting through the tree line and moving away from the trail, choosing terrain too rough for wheels and too dense for speed. Behind them, voices began to echo. Shouts, commands, the crunch of boots and the whine of radios. The hunters were close now, and they weren't guessing anymore. As they ran, Keanu pulled out his phone, one he had kept turned off for days. He powered it on and activated the emergency beacon, one only a few people knew existed. If anyone in law enforcement outside of Radner's pocket saw it, help might come. But even hope took time, and time was in short supply. They reached a ravine with an old footbridge, rickety, half-rotten, and swaying in the wind. Keanu tested it quickly and waved Emma forward. "Go, fast, don't stop, I'll be right behind you." Emma hesitated. For a second, then ran across, the planks groaning under her weight. Keanu followed just as the first gunshot rang out behind them, splintering the trunk of a tree inches from his shoulder. He didn't look back. He crossed the bridge and, once on the other side, slashed the support ropes with the folding knife from the bag. The bridge collapsed into the gorge below just as their pursuers reached the edge. It wouldn't stop them forever. But it was something. They kept running, hearts pounding, lungs screaming. Then suddenly the forest opened into a field, and beyond it, like a miracle, was the sheriff's truck, its lights flashing, its engine running. A woman stood beside it, badge on her chest, radio in one hand and a shotgun in the other. "Get in," she shouted. Keanu pushed Emma toward the passenger door and jumped in after her. The truck peeled away, gravel kicking up behind them as the woman drove like the wheel was an extension of her pulse. "I got the signal," she said. "Barely. Good thing I'm not on Radner's payroll." Keanu handed her the flash drive. "Everything's on this. Names, dates, evidence. But you need to go public. Wide. Immediately." She nodded, her jaw clenched. "You've got it." Emma stared out the window, the wind whipping through her hair. Behind them, the men in black coats grew smaller until they were just specks in the trees, and then, finally, they were gone. 2 weeks later, the news broke nationwide. A joint federal investigation launched in secret. Arrests made, names exposed, Harlan West found and indicted, and in the heart of it all, hidden beneath layers of silence and fear, was a notebook, a flash drive, and the bravery of a girl who had saved a man before she even knew who he was. On a quiet Sunday morning, in a town that was beginning to heal, Emma stood outside the rebuilt diner where her mother now worked full-time. Again, beside her was a brand-new community library, funded anonymously. But everyone in Miller's Ridge knew who the donor was. Keanu Reeves arrived just after sunrise, wearing the same leather jacket but with softer eyes. He knelt in front of Emma, handed her a new notebook, and smiled. "You didn't just save me," he said. "You reminded me why we keep fighting." Emma opened the first page. Written inside was a quote. "The river doesn't choose who it carries, but sometimes it brings together those who were always meant to meet." And for the first time in a long time, she felt like the world made sense.